going to be reading out this article today. This is John Ford, or The Eloquence of Gesture by Shigehiko Hasumi. Now, this was originally published in French. It has been translated into English by our dear friend, not officially, Adrian Martin. The Senator and the Mailbag. A train advances towards us, drawn by a steam locomotive, and slows down at the end of the platform of a small station. This image makes us think of L'arrivée d'un train à la ciutat, 1895. Excuse my French pronunciation is probably very horrible. But in this introductory shot of Jean Ford's Dr. Bull, 1933, the train whistle blows several times. We will re-find this sober railway setting at the start of The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance 1962, but does the mise-en-scene of that twilight western rest upon the same narrative principle as in the first installment of the Will Rogers trilogy shot by Ford for Fox? At first glance, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance confirms the classical rule of construction. The film begins with a train carrying Senator James Stewart and his wife Vera Miles from the capital to this little western town, and it ends with their departure. This white-haired couple have come for the funeral of a friend. The political man's memories of what he experienced in this town unfold in flashback. The train's arrival is thus indispensable to the film's narrative organization. In Dr. Bull, by contrast, the train plays a purely anecdotal role, since no character alights from it. The narrative mechanism works on a different level. In the film's opening shot, the train carries a single object, a black postal bag suddenly thrown from the carriage, landing brusquely. The close-up of this mailbag on the ground begins the narration and prefigures the shot of the bank bag thrown by Doc Holliday, Victor Mature, as a farewell gesture to Chihuahua, Linda Darnell, in My Darling Clementine, 1946. In Dr. Bull, we do not see who throws the bag. A postal worker picks it up and carries it to the office. The chat then shared among colleagues introduces the character of Dr. Bull. Likewise, at the end, a train stops at the station, filmed from the same angle. This time a white mailbag is thrown from the carriage. The identical action of throwing thus organizes the film's narrative progression. The postal worker informs the controller that the country doctor is about to make a great scientific discovery. Dr. Bull will take the train for this night ride with his new wife. The film ends on the image of the departing train, but on the narrative level it is really the throwing of the mailbag which closes the story. The resemblance between Dr. Bull and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance is thus more than merely superficial. Collective motion. It is specific to Ford to show us the image of a bag being thrown rather than a train arriving or departing. The bag has no particular meaning, but the fact that it is thrown plays a role in the narration. Let us designate this gesture of throwing as a theme which, through its repetition, articulates the narrative structure of the films, whatever their genre. The signification of the throwing theme varies from one film to the next. It is a unifying element, making analogous moments from different films correspond. On the narrative level, this theme marks sometimes an opening, sometimes a rupture. It sets off, speeds up, or slows down the course of the narrative. In Steamboat Round the Bend, 1935, the last installment of the Will Rogers trilogy, the collective throwing of objects is the function of announcing the film's denouement. The narrative is organized according to that well-known Griffithian system, a last-minute rescue. An innocent young man accused of murder awaits hanging. His fiancée, encouraged by her prospective uncle, a seller of snake oil, looks for a witness to save her lover from the scaffold. She finds this person and takes him on the uncle's boat, destined for City Hall. Time is pressing, but the Mississippi is blocked by a boating competition. The uncle decides to participate in it, but alas, his steamboat slows down halfway, lacking fuel. Rogers then orders the crew to start throwing objects. So the representative Fordian figures of the 30s, Francis Ford, Stephen Fetchit, Burton Churchill, throw everything flammable into the engine. Tables, chairs, deck lumber, wax dolls, even the medicine bottles, which are really full of rum. With each bottle, the flames rise enormously. The boat quickens and arrives safe and sound. This absurdly funny water race sequence is worthy of the Marx Brothers. In Go West, 1940, the Marx Brothers destroy their wagons in order to hurl the debris into a locomotive engine. The throwing theme is decisive on the narrative level. This collective action saves the innocent young man. The example of Steamboat Round the Bend prompts us to reflect on the throwing theme, on the thrower and on the object thrown, when and to what end. Collective throwing, although rare, creates typical Fordian situations. In How Green Was My Valley 1941, the family members throw their salaries into the mother's huge apron. Collective throwing as a family ritual can be found in a completely opposite context in Tobacco Road 1941, where the decline of farmers during the Great Depression is symbolized by the brutality of the unemployed son throwing a baseball against the wall of the wooden house. The starving family members, cued by a silent signal from the mother, throw rocks at the house of son-in-law Ward Bond in order to steal his turnips. Like in a military operation, they each carry a large rock and silently approach the young man who has been seduced by the girl in the family, Jean Tierney. Thanks to this collective rock throwing, they succeed in getting some turnips. This sequence devoted to human misery is transformed into an optimistic scene close to light comedy. It is because of the magic of the Fortean theme of throwing. Another collective hurl. In She Wore Yellow Ribbon 1949, the veteran cavalry sergeant Victor McLaglen, about to retire, drinks Irish whiskey under the eyes of a debonair barman, Francis Ford. On the same day, Captain Bristol John Wayne quits the army for good. The sergeant, in civilian dress, fights off the blows from the colleagues who have come to arrest him. He will enter the security section of the prison. In their rather battered state, the soldiers accept the sergeant's proposition to drink in celebration of the captain's departure. In their glee, they throw their glasses at the window. The barman hurls his whiskey bottle and the sergeant sends a soldier of small stature to the wall. This improvised farewell ceremony is scarcely military in nature. Pure movement. In Ford, throwing an object does not only represent a collective anti-conformist ritual at the core of a rigid community. This thematic repeated rite throughout his career takes on varied significations and functions. The characters, regardless of their class, race, or gender, express their emotions by throwing anything that comes into their hands, sometimes purposelessly so. Thus, in Fort Apache 1948, when the cavalry captain John Wayne, accompanied by an ex-officer from the South, Pedro Armendariz, throws a whiskey bottle into a ravine, his act of throwing traces a glorious movement in space. It is the same when the deserter, Ben Johnson, in Rio Grande, 1950, descending at a gallop down the cliff, throws a can. Both scenes occur within the desert landscape of Monument Valley. Through its beauty, the movement of the thrown object makes us momentarily forget narrative logic. We know the provenance of the bottle and the can, but the suddenness of the throw in isolation catches us unawares. The act of throwing as a theme functions here by surprise. We know that it comes at the end of a sequence in Fort Apache, while in Rio Grande it marks the beginning. Ford's genius is demonstrated in such unexpected but indispensable mise-en-scene. Ben Johnson throwing his gun into the distance in Wagon Master 1950 is also inscribed in this context. It is at the level of such thematic surprise that we discover a very fine moment in the Civil War episode of How the West Was Won, 1962. The Southern soldier George Peppard returns to the farm where he was born and learns that his parents died during the war. We see the image of his younger brother throwing a bucket of water in the yard where a tree casts shade. This gesture represents, in its casualness, an affectionate welcome for the older brother, similar to the thrown mailbag, which in Dr. Bull opened and closed a narrative. The thrown water bucket, like the can and whiskey bottle, lacking symbolic meaning, plays the narrative role of kicking off a final scene in an improvised manner. That's just the first part of the piece. You might read out and continue it in a later upload, but until then, thanks again.